This is Lindsay's Science School. Brought to you by Craig Swap and Associates.
Hi kids, I am Miss Lindsay and this is my science school. Guess what we're talking about today? We're talking about earthquakes. We've had a few of those in Utah lately, haven't we? I'm sure many of you have. And you felt those earthquakes, that shaking in the ground. So that's why I wanted to talk about earthquakes today and explain them a little bit to you. To understand earthquakes, you've got to understand the earth. This is our earth. This is where we live. And it looks like it is a solid ball, right? But if you were to go underneath the surface of the earth, you would find that the earth is actually divided into different pieces, sort of like a jigsaw puzzle. These different pieces are called tectonic plates. And if you look all the way around the earth, you will find these tectonic plates or these jigsaw puzzle pieces that piece our earth together. Now, these jigsaw pieces can move sometimes, and when they move, you get an earthquake, and that's when you feel the ground shaking underneath you, like I'm sure many of you did with that earthquake we had in Magna just last month. Did you know that there's actually 3 different types of earthquakes? So I wanted to talk about those 3 different earthquakes for a second right now. To understand earthquakes, we've got to go deep into the earth. If you were to dig a hole and dig and dig and dig and dig and dig, you would eventually come to a place where you run into liquid rock. It's so hot underneath the earth's surface that it's liquefied that rock, and it's called the mantle. And so it's liquid down there. Now the plates actually sit on top of the mantle. And because the mantle is liquid, those plates can shift around just a little bit. So here's 3 different ways that those plates can shift around. By the way, I should mention to you that where those plates come together is called a fault line, and that's where earthquakes happen. So let's talk about those 3 different types of earthquakes. First of all, you can have an earthquake where those plates actually slide apart. When they slide apart from each other, this mantle actually cools and you get new crust forming. This is called a divergent earthquake. Can you say that with me? Divergent earthquake. That's when 2 plates move apart from each other. This generally happens underneath the ocean floor. So you get new ocean floor that's forming there on the earth, and those 2 plates slide apart. Okay, let's reset this now. Now let's talk about the second kind of earthquake you can have. That's where these plates actually slide past each other. So I'll take plate B right here and just slide it forward just a little bit. These are the kind of earthquakes that happen in California. California is actually sliding, and actually millions of years from now, California could be all the way up by Alaska because that plate is sliding toward the north. These are called transform earthquakes when these happen. Now, the third type of earthquake is the most common type of earthquake that we have here in Utah. That's where plate B is actually going to slide underneath plate A, and plate A comes up just a little bit. Now, when an earthquake like this happens, remember that on top of the plates, convergent earthquakes can create mountains because you've got the surface. And so when plate A comes up, it actually can create the mountain. That's how the Wasatch Mountains were formed here in Utah, because one plate is sliding underneath the other and pushing it up, and then that pushes up the surface of the earth, and we get the Wasatch Mountains that we get to look at every single day. Do you want to try making your own earthquakes? We're going to do that today over at the science desk. Let's go over there. You'll recognize Miss Jade. Miss Jade is helping me out again. Hello, Miss Jade.
Hi, Miss Lindsay. I've already learned so much, and I haven't even done anything yet.
I'm so glad you've learned so much.
I had no clue that the Wasatch Mountains were made from an earthquake.
Yep, they were. Millions and millions and millions of earthquakes over many, many millions of years is how we got this.
Right, not just one.
Right, absolutely. Millions of earthquakes created those big old mountains. So to create our own earthquakes, we're going to play with some food today. Doesn't that sound fun?
I've already started, actually.
Perfect.
These Rice Krispie treats are delicious.
She's been snacking over here just a little bit. Okay, so we are actually going to do this on a cutting board. You can just do it on your kitchen countertop at home, or you can get out a cutting board like this. The first thing we're going to use is our easy cheese, okay? This is going to be the mantle, or it's going to symbolize the mantle. That's the liquid part way underneath the surface. That's liquid rock. So what I want you to do is I want you just to spray some of that easy cheese, just some strips of easy cheese down. Good, that's perfect. Let me move these graham crackers out of the way so everybody can see what you're doing. So this is our mantle. It's liquid.
Oh, geez.
Oh, are we running out?
We might be almost out.
I might have snacked on the easy cheese a little bit.
But I think we've got a fair amount of mantle.
Absolutely. That should be good. She's going to get every single last bit out of there.
Easy cheese in a while. Really escalated.
Okay, from this point on, once you've laid your mantle down, now we need the plates. And for the tectonic plates, we're going to use 2 different graham crackers. Okay, so she's got 2 out there. Lay them just right on top of the mantle. Perfect. Put them right together. So where they come together, that's our fault line. Okay? So the first earthquake we're going to make is a divergent earthquake. Do you remember what happens, Miss Jade, when we have a divergent earthquake?
I knew you were going to ask me a question.
This is your pop quiz, Miss Jade. Were you listening?
Let's see. It is when they separate.
Yes, they slide apart. You're exactly right. So slide those plates apart. Good. That's what happens in a divergent earthquake. These happen usually underneath the ocean floor. It's when 2 continents are sliding farther apart from each other. Okay, reset those if you can. Just push them back together.
I think I've had a little issue.
You can get new graham crackers if you want, or we can just use 2 graham crackers. Yeah, just set those aside. Let's just use the little ones.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, now let's do a transform earthquake. This is what happens in California. This is why California, over millions of years, will start sliding up toward Alaska.
And does it slide back and forth, or does it just slide one way?
It usually just slides one direction. So that's what happens in a transform earthquake. Okay, reset that if you can.
Yes.
And now we're going to do the last kind of earthquake when the 2 come together, a convergent earthquake. This is where one goes over the top of the other. And these are the kind of earthquakes that we have here in Utah that have created the Wasatch Mountains. So right now, up to this point, we've just talked about the tectonic plates. And remember, they're way underneath the surface of the earth. So to represent the surface of the earth, that's what we're going to use the Rice Krispie treats for. Now, when I was making these Rice Krispie treats, I added a ½ cup of sweetened condensed milk. That just makes them a little bit gooier and a little bit softer to make it easier to make our mountains that we're going to make. So why don't you put our surface of the earth on top of our tectonic plates.
Okay, I'm gonna put it in half.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's split it in half. That's perfect. Look how gooey those are. Yeah.
And they're delicious.
Okay, so put
I've never had them with cheese on them before, so I don't know if they still will be.
Sweet and salty together. It might be good. Who knows? Maybe if your mom will let you, you can try it afterwards. Okay, so let's now do a divergent earthquake again, where they separate and they pull apart. Good. So not a whole lot happens to the surface of the earth with these ones. We're not creating mountains or anything. We're actually creating new ocean floor with these ones. Okay, put it back together if you can. Now let's do the transform again. That's what California is doing, sliding up just like that. Perfect. But the fun one to do is the convergent earthquake, and that's where the one plate goes underneath the other. And what happens when Jade squishes those plates together? What do we create?
The Wasatch Mountains.
The Wasatch Mountains. You're exactly right. So those are the 3 kinds of earthquakes that we have: divergent earthquakes, transform earthquakes, and convergent earthquakes. Now you're all a mess. I should have gotten you some paper towels or some napkins or something.
That's what makes it fun.
That is what makes it fun.
Yeah,
playing with your food and getting messy for science.
And learning something.
Yes. Now we've got a second experiment that we're going to do. So let's move all of this out of the way. You hand all of this to me. Perfect. We're going to set it over here on the side of the science desk.
I'll eat that one later. Doesn't have any cheese
that
on
can
it.
be our snack later. Perfect. Okay, for our second earthquake experiment that we're going to do, we're going to talk about epicenters. I haven't really talked about an epicenter yet. We were talking about fault lines. That's where the plates come together, and that's where the earthquake happens. If you were to follow that, oh, here's Lab Assistant
Got our lab
Kevin.
assistant.
Lab Assistant Kevin to the rescue.
Thanks, Lab Assistant.
If you were to go from the fault line directly to the surface of the Earth, that's called the epicenter. It's the central place where the earthquake happens. And that's where most of the damage happens as well. So when we had the Magna earthquake just a few months or a few weeks ago, it feels like a few months ago, doesn't it? But it was just a few weeks ago that we had that earthquake. So most of the damage that we saw was in the Magna area. It was close to the epicenter. So we want to do an experiment now to teach you about epicenters. So for this, we need 2 pieces of wood. I have 2x4s here. They tend to work the best. I've got sugar cubes, and I've got a box that I've broken down, okay? So what I'm gonna do on this box is I'm going to draw basically a bullseye, okay? So I've drawn a little circle here, and now I'm gonna draw other circles around this, and I'll pick this up and show it to you when I'm done so you can see what I'm doing. It doesn't have to be perfect. Mine clearly are not perfect. Okay.
But if you wanted it to be, you could if you had...
Yeah, absolutely.
What's that called?
Okay.
A compass?
Yes.
Yeah.
You'd have to have a really big compass to do this. So this is going to be our epicenter. And then I've drawn these circles going out from the epicenter so that you can see that the most damage that happens will be right here where the earthquake happens. Now that we've done that, we're going to take our pieces of wood. Jade, I'm going to give you one. We're going to lay them out like this. And what we're going to do is we're going to put our surface of the earth on top of our blocks of wood. Now we get to have some fun building with sugar cubes. So take some sugar cubes, and what we want to do is we want to just build little houses and little buildings. Okay, so we just stack them up like this. I like to make little triangles, or you can do, let's do some taller buildings, maybe like some skyscrapers like we have here in downtown. So I'll build this one a little bit taller. That's good enough. Let's build some over here. Here's a little house. Okay, we'll put one here. So you guys can just have fun.
My own earthquake.
Building things as high as you want to build, putting as many on as you want to. We'll just use the sugar cubes that we have in this bowl. And when we're done, that will be our little city. Okay. Sort of like Legos, but with sugar cubes.
Fun.
Okay, so what happens with an earthquake? It happens underneath the surface. See where my hand is down here? So this is where those tectonic plates are coming together. And so it's directly above, right where I've drawn that circle right here, that's going to be called the epicenter. Now, Jade, what I want you to do is I want you to stick your hand underneath there, and I want you to start tapping on the bottom of the box. So tap, 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 tap. Oh, oh, look at that. So do you see how we saw the most damage closer to the epicenter? Over here, Jade's building over here didn't
structurally
fall down.
sound.
It is structurally sound because it's farther away from the epicenter. This little house that I built over here, it's doing okay because it's farther away from the epicenter. But can you see how those areas right by the center of the earthquake, they had the most damage? Now,
Pretty
Jade,
cool.
do you know what you should do if you find yourself in an earthquake?
Yes.
What should you do? Where should you go?
Well, either under a door frame.
Yep.
Or under a table.
Under something sturdy, underneath a bed, a table, because the most likely way that you are to get hurt in an earthquake is by things falling on you. Maybe a bookcase or a TV or a shelf could fall on you. So you will want to get underneath something sturdy, like we could get underneath our science desk here if we were to have an earthquake. And this would protect us from things falling over. Maybe this monitor right here, this TV right here would topple over. Well, this desk is going to protect me. So you want to make sure that you get underneath something sturdy when an earthquake is happening. So I hope you remember that.
Yeah, and that's what I did.
Yeah.
When you got under your weather
I got
desk,
under my weather
and
desk.
I got under mine in the back as well.
Yep, that's what we need to do. It's perfect. because as we saw, things can fall down during earthquakes. You don't need to be scared about earthquakes. As long as you know what to do in an earthquake, you really don't need to be scared because you know exactly what you're going to do. You and your family can do earthquake drills where somebody suddenly goes, earthquake! And you guys have to pretend that an earthquake just happened and you got to find somewhere to get underneath where you would be protected if an earthquake had really happened right then. So that's maybe something that you can do with your family today to have a little bit of fun. Just assign somebody to be the earthquake person and randomly they can call out earthquake and everybody has to get underneath a bed or underneath a table. It's kind of a fun game to play.
Yeah, it's great. And you learn so much. And
Yes.
I remember as a kid we did that as well. And I grew up younger in California where there are a lot of earthquakes.
Yep.
And I was in a big earthquake when I was about 5 years old.
Oh, you were?
And remembered exactly what to do because we would do drills at school.
Yeah. So
And
it's
we stood
important
under
to do
doorways.
those drills.
Mhm, it is.
Okay, do we have any questions coming in? I forgot to tell you, I mean, those of you that have watched always know that you can send in your questions to me and I'll answer them. They can be questions about earthquakes, questions about weather, questions about anything science related, really, and I'll be able to answer them here. Throw your child's name in there, their age, you can even throw in their school if you want to as well, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we have. If we just got a few minutes left, but we'll try to get to as many as we can.
What creates an earthquake?
It's those plates moving. They're sitting on top of the mantle, as I mentioned. Remember, the mantle is liquid, and liquids tend to move a little bit. And so if you have something sitting on top of that liquid mantle, it's gonna move just a little bit. And it's the plates moving that produce that shaking that we feel up here on the surface.
So this is a great question. Are fault lines related to each other? So as there was an earthquake in Utah just a few weeks ago, then there was another one not long after in Idaho.
In Idaho, yeah. So those two in particular were not related to each other. But yes, fault lines can be related to each other. You can have one fault and then it has like a little branch that can come off of it and another branch that can come off over this direction. So sometimes fault lines are related to each other. An earthquake in one place along the fault line can cause an earthquake somewhere else along the fault line. But like that Idaho earthquake and our Magna earthquake, those two were not related in any way.
Sadie and Caden from West Clinton, they want to know which tectonic plate is the biggest.
Oh, gosh, I don't know. Maybe the Pacific, the one underneath the Pacific Ocean. That would be my guess, but I'm not positive about that. I'll have to find out that answer for you and write you there on Facebook and give you the exact, but that would be my guess.
Let's see what else we have. Oh, someone wanting to know if they could use maybe a different treat other than a Rice Krispie.
Sure, yeah, as long as it's pliable in some way, as long as when you push it together, it's going to squish together to make that mountain, you can use whatever you've got at home. Absolutely.
What has been the biggest earthquake in Utah?
The biggest earthquake in Utah happened before we even had seismographs. Do you know what a seismograph is? A seismograph is the instrument we use to measure how strong earthquakes are. So the strongest one that we've ever had was around a 7.0. And the reason I say around a 7.0 is because we didn't have great seismographs at that time to give us those exact measurements, but it was right around a 7.0. And lab assistant Kevin is telling me that it is the Pacific Plate, so I was right.
Ding, 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 ding.
I was right. Yay. Thank you, lab assistant Kevin.
Also wanting to know, Wilson, a first grader from Newman Elementary, wants to know how the plates move. What makes them move?
Okay, because they're sitting on top of the mantle. And remember, the mantle is liquid. It's liquid rock. And so liquids tend to move a little bit easier than solids do. And so when it moves a little bit, it can move those plates just a little bit. And they might just move a tiny, tiny bit, but that can cause a big old earthquake.
So if the mantle is so hot,
yes,
why don't the plates on top melt?
You know what? That is a good question.
Because science.
Science.
Because
That's right.
science says so.
I'm going to have to get you an answer to that question too, because honestly, I don't know. I am not an expert in earthquakes. I know a lot about earthquakes, but are you giving me the answer, Lab Assistant Kevin?
Oh, it's fantastic.
Largest one in Utah was a 6.6. I thought it was closer to a 7, but you are right. Lab Assistant Kevin has all the answers. So yeah, I am not positive as to why the plates don't melt, but they don't.
But they
and
don't.
I will get you an answer, and I'll write you on Facebook and let you know.
And then, of course, you could use other things other than sugar cubes.
Sure,
you could use blocks or
yeah.
anything that you want to build
Use
with,
whatever is around your house. I just use the sugar cubes because that's what I had. But yeah, you can use blocks. You could use, what else could we use? Dice. If you have dice from a game, you could use that. So yeah, whatever you've got laying around your house, you can use for this. An old box, some old pieces of wood, and some blocks or some sugar cubes, and you can have a good old time making earthquakes and making things fall down.
Another question is from Boston,
Okay.
from Farnsworth Elementary. Where do the biggest earthquakes happen?
Ooh, the biggest earthquakes. The biggest earthquake that I know of, I believe it happened in Indonesia. We're going to have Lab Assistant Kevin check that out. But it was Indonesian. It was the Pacific Plate moving a little bit. And I believe that was over a 9.0. But Lab Assistant Kevin's going to get back to us with that answer right away.
Yes, he is.
Oh, do you have it? Do you have it? He's walking toward me. Nope, he stopped.
Valdivia, Chile.
Oh, in Chile. What was the magnitude on it?
Looking for it.
Okay. And again, that's the Pacific Plate. And the Pacific Plate is usually divergent earthquakes. It's those continents moving apart from each other, and it's creating new ocean floor. So it probably happened right off the coastline of Chile as South America slowly moves farther and farther away from Asia. So how big was it?
9.5.
9.5.
May 1960.
1960 is when that happened. That was the largest earthquake ever.
And then you say new crust forms. How long does it take for that new crust to form after the divergent earthquake?
It's pretty quickly because that mantle cools down. As soon as it hits that ocean water, it instantly cools down and creates that new crust.
Almost like lava.
Yes, it's exactly like lava. Yeah, it's that magma underneath the Earth's surface. Magma is just lava underneath the surface. When a volcano explodes, that's magma coming up through the Earth's surface, and then it's lava once it reaches the surface. So just the name of it changes, but it's liquid rock. And you can see how with a volcano, how that lava hardens into rock, into lava rock is what we call it. And the same thing's happening along the ocean floor. As those plates slide apart, the magma cools and it creates that new ocean floor.
So just like it can create mountains, it can also create volcanoes.
It can. The magma can.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, as it builds up pressure. And we're going to do a science lesson on volcanoes here coming up. So you'll learn about that then. But yeah, it can build up pressure, and it finds little cracks through the Earth's surface and builds up those volcanic mountains. And then when the pressure gets too great, they explode. So we're going to talk about volcanoes in an upcoming lesson.
And last question.
Yeah.
How many earthquakes has Utah had?
Total? Oh, goodness.
Total.
I don't know, because we actually have earthquakes happening here all the time. Most of them are too small for you to feel, but I would guess that we have had millions and millions and millions of earthquakes over the years, most of them too small for you to feel.
Because we've had hundreds and hundreds of aftershocks
We have.
just from our last earthquake 3 weeks ago in Magna.
You're exactly right. Now let's talk about the difference for just a second. We've got about 1 or 2 minutes left. You get an earthquake and aftershocks. You've probably heard of both of those. So the initial earthquake happens, those plates move, or they slide underneath another one. And that's what creates that initial shaking and that initial earthquake. Well, after that, the plates have to settle into their new position. So as they're resettling and getting used to that new position, you'll get what are called aftershocks. Those are earthquakes that are happening as the plates settle. They are not as strong as the initial earthquake. That's why we call them aftershocks. And you can have hundreds or thousands of them in the days and weeks that come after an earthquake. So you've probably, those of you that live here along the Wasatch Front, you felt that earthquake, and then you've probably felt some aftershocks since. I know that we have.
Yeah, at least 4 or 5 probably.
It's kind of unnerving, and you go, oh no, is this going to be an even bigger earthquake? Well, 95% of the time, the aftershocks are always smaller than the initial earthquake. Every once in a while, you'll get an aftershock that's stronger, and then it's no longer considered an aftershock.
Then it would be another earthquake,
an
right?
Earthquake. You're exactly right. But just know that it's totally normal for days and weeks after an earthquake to get those aftershocks. All right.
Fascinating.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Helping me and getting your hands dirty and playing
yeah.
with food. We had a great time today learning about earthquakes. I hope you learned a lot as well. Let me show you what things you'll need if you're coming back for our next lesson, which is happening Tuesday morning at 9:30 a.m. here on the KUTV Facebook page. You're going to need a cardboard box that's broken down. You can even use the same box that you used for our Epicenter experiment. You'll need a marker, some tape, some construction paper, thumbtack or push pin, and a long strand of hair. You're going to have to yank out somebody's piece of hair for this as well. We're going to be learning about humidity. Humidity is moisture in the atmosphere. So we're going to be learning about that. We're going to be making a cool experiment so that you can tell if there's a lot of moisture in the air, if it's really humid, or if it's really dry. That piece of hair is going to help you to decide that. So we'll talk about that on Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. Don't be tardy.
Toodles.